It has a very, very rich, submerged cultural history, and I discovered a number of significant wrecks of historical nature, and one of them was the City Service Empire. I actually found a reference to it in a book that was written by Mark Mondano, and in the book he described the one dive he did on it, which was brief. It was a bounce dive, and from that book I had pretty much decided the City Service Empire was a wreck I wanted to see. The wreck is located 33 miles east of Port Canaveral in approximately 240 foot of water. It was an oil tanker. It's owned by originally the City Service Empire. It was a big tanker. It sunk by a German U-boat, and so it's a large vessel. It's a huge relief. I mean, 25 foot, maybe even more, between the sand and the upper deck. The superstructure somewhat collapsed over time, kind of just sort of splat and spilled out on top, but there's a lot of access entry points up on the deck, stairways going inside. You have one distinguishing feature is where the torpedo hit. You can still see that. It's an enormous wreck in that you could dive and dive and dive and dive. I mean, you could spend years diving on it and still not really see everything. Early in the war, those tankers had no armaments, and then right around or just prior to early 1942, they started outfitting the Liberty ships with guns. So this gun, it has a gun out on the stern, still kind of pointed out. You can see it looks like it was getting ready, set up for action. The ship was sunk. It was alone. It was not in any convoy, and it was one of the early victims of the war. Later on, they changed tactics. The military, they used air cover. They started running ships in convoys to protect them. It's not uncommon yet, 2-3 knot currents, and the people tend to think of the depth as being the difficulty, when the reality is it's actually the currents that they have right out there 33 miles out. Early on, that was one of the handicaps we had, which was actually trying, how do you get to 240 feet in 3 knots? There are a number of different methods, one of which is simply what they call a smart bomb, which is simply a dive vessel gets over the wreck, makes a note of the conditions, especially the current, the way the wind's blowing, etc. Then takes the divers up current, depending upon the current strength, a certain predetermined amount up current, and then you just simply jump in the water and just kick to the bottom. And the idea is that by the time that diver leaves the surface and arrives at 200 foot, the current has kind of just swished them right into the wreck. And if everybody's together, and you got a good captain, and you did your calculations, most of the time you'll end up right on the wreck. The beauty of that is it's a no-stress descent. You're not fighting the current. You just simply, it's a straight down, and you're now using the current to your advantage. We went out there, I think it was like on my second dive on the wreck. No, actually, I think it was the third dive. I dove with another person, and on the bottom we ended up getting split up. It's a very technical, challenging dive, strong currents, etc., etc. We ended up getting split up on the bottom, and I had a camera that day, and I really wanted to, at that time I was very much into still photography, and I wanted to capture that wreck because it was so untouched. It was just this, virgin shipwreck. And so I ended up on the bottom, and you couldn't really get photos that day. The conditions weren't that good. And so I started wandering around the wreck. I ended up on the bow, and it was just, I saw the bow just laying right there on the deck. I couldn't believe it. It's something I guess most wreck divers dream about, and it doesn't happen very often. And so when I spotted it, I recognized immediately what it was, and I made the decision at 220 feet that I was going to send this thing to the surface. When I dove the Empire, I reached a point where I started to realize that taking artifacts from wrecks, it's not. There are some wrecks that deserve protection, and the City Service Empire is one of them. And so I took the bell because I wanted to find a home for it, and I wanted to protect it to see that it went to the right place. Because I knew that if I didn't, I knew that someone else would take it and then it would be lost. And ultimately what happened is I not only recovered the bell, but I realized my dream, which was to return the bell to the family, and the family of Captain German.
Mark Zerl has just been so generous, you know, with the family to allow us to be a part of the bell's journey. And I say it's a journey because, you know, it had its time on the ship of the Empire, and with my grandfather and my great uncle, you know, he actually rang that bell when he was on watch. And then, you know, with it being there on the bottom of the ocean in this cold, harsh climate, you know, and then Mark Zerl finding it and bringing it to the surface, it was almost like it was meant to be. And then spent time with him and spending time with my family, and it's surrounded by people who respect it and what it stands for, and eventually, hopefully, we'll be able to put it on loan with the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, so that others can see it and be inspired by it and learn from its history. The Empire sank in February 22nd, 1942, and it has no protection, and essentially it is a war grave. And it should be treated as such, and it should be treated with respect. And I have a problem with people who go down and don't, you know, respect it and recognize its history and the sacrifice that it made for this country. So I would like to see some, you know, sort of protections put in place for these wrecks and others like the City Service Empire.
When you dive on a wreck, it isn't just a piece of bulkhead down there on the bottom. People died there, and so now, many years later, we shouldn't forget about what happened. And I'm hoping someday that this piece of living history that is now off the coast of Brevard County, which now lies on the bottom, that people can visit it as a living museum and see it in its historical context, which is almost like the day it fell.
It's not right to take something and not leave it for somebody else to discover. There won't be anything to discover from that time period. Sure, these wrecks will be down there for a long time to come, and they should be treated as a grave, a historical reference, something to be properly documented, and not something to be picked upon.
Got this plaque made, and you know, and on it, it has the names of the men who perished on that day. And on the plaque it says, "A grateful nation remembers." Oh. That is amazing.
This plaque was designed by Debbie, and it was her idea. Get choked up about it. But today's the first day that she saw the bottom of it. It's gonna be choked up.
The plan is to actually have deep divers take this plaque down to the Empire itself and place it along with a wreath during the ceremony.
And our hope is that by putting a plaque on the ship, which is a unique thing to do, that the divers that go in the future will see that plaque and see that people are involved. Real people were on that ship. Real people died on that ship, and 7 bodies are probably still on that ship. O God of grace and glory, remember before you this day our brothers who died on the Empire. And I list them now. Of the 50 men on the ship, 14 died. August Brune, Coxswain Bossum, Francisco Rios, Louis Doobie, Seaman St. Clair Gowan, James Grenier,
William German Jr., the master, our grandfather and father, Antonio Lorenzo, Alva Madsen, Andrew Rasmussen, Hasker Readers, James Reeves, Monroe Reynolds, and Coxon Walker of the U.S. Navy. They are the 14 who died. 7 are missing and presumed to be still on board the ship down below us.
The Empire, was not just, a ship made of steel. It was a ship that carried real people with real lives and real families. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that don't recognize that. They just see it as a wreck. When you think about the Empire, think about the people, the men that were on that ship, including my grandfather.